As I was finishing up a long day at work, the office hum had finally subsided, and I received the phone call. I was mentally getting ready to go home, cleaning up my desk, when my wife's name appeared on my phone as it buzzed. I smiled when I saw the screen. She frequently called around this time to remind me to pick up something on the way back, or to ask how my day went. I answered the call, my voice warm, but something in her tone caught me off guard. It was cold, icy even. "Nathan, I must speak. With you," she said. I stopped, my smile fading. "Is everything all right?" "No," she replied bluntly. Her next words hit me like a freight train. "I want a divorce." For a brief moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt completely out of context, entirely inappropriate. We weren't perfect, but I never thought things would become this bad. I stammered, trying to process. "Emma, I just heard you say you want a divorce. When did this happen?" she replied in an emotionless voice. "I've made up my mind. I don't want to talk about it with you. If you have any questions, contact your lawyer, or mine." My chest tightened. "You've already spoken to a lawyer?" "Don't try to call me Nathan. You'll hear from him soon," she stated simply. "Emma, this is crazy," I said, my voice rising. "At least give me—" But she cut me off. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said, her tone as cold and detached as ever. "This is what I want." And then the line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, utterly stunned. My heart raced with unanswered questions. How could this be happening after 7 years of marriage? I thought we were solid. Sure, she'd been distant recently, but I chalked it up to stress or a rough patch. I never imagined this. The drive home was a blur. Her words replayed in my mind like a haunting chant, each repetition adding another layer of confusion and pain. By the time I got home, the emptiness hit me like a physical blow. The house was eerily silent. I wandered through the rooms, looking for some clue, something to explain what had gone so terribly wrong. But everything was in its place, neat and organized, as if nothing had happened. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from me where we used to share meals and talk about our day. Now it felt like a hollow reminder of what I'd lost. That night I lay in bed, replaying every conversation, every moment from the past year, wondering if I'd missed a sign. By morning I was exhausted, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this go without answers. If Emma wouldn't explain, I'd find out myself. The following days were a haze of shock and frustration. Emma's sudden declaration echoed in my mind, making it impossible to focus on anything. Then, the email arrived. It was from her lawyer, Henry Clark, outlining the steps for the divorce. It was a gut punch. Emma had been planning this. She'd moved pieces on a chessboard I didn't even know I was on. 2 days later, I found myself in Henry's office. The receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile, but inside, I was a mess. Henry, an older man with a polished demeanor, guided me to a conference room. As I sat down, I noticed a flicker of unease on his face, quickly masked by professionalism. "I'm here to make this process as smooth as possible," he said, his tone measured. I leaned forward, my voice firm. "I appreciate that, Mr. Clark, but I'm not here to talk logistics. I want to know why Emma is doing this." He hesitated, shuffling his papers. "I'm not at liberty to discuss personal matters," he replied. My frustration boiled over. "You've been conspiring with my wife to ruin our marriage. I have a right to know why." Henry froze, his professional mask slipping. He sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing his temples. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he murmured, "but you deserve to know." I held my breath. "She's been planning this for months," he admitted. "She's been gathering evidence, building a case to secure the majority of your joint assets. And—" He hesitated. "There's someone else." His words hit me like a physical blow. My stomach churned. "Someone else?" I whispered. He nodded. I can't say more, but she's been calculated. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Thank you, Mr. Clark, I said, my voice tight. That's all I needed to know. As I left his office, a storm of emotions swirled inside me. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. But beneath it all, a new resolve began to form. Emma may have been planning this for months, but I wasn't going to let her blindside me anymore. This wasn't the end. Chris and I left the office with the understanding that he would examine the data and return to us with an updated counteroffer. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt as though I wasn't merely responding to Emma's schemes. Later, that night, while sitting in my workshop, I replayed the moves I was leading. I had spent weeks feeling like a victim of the confrontation, exhausted, yet oddly empowered. A victim was caught off guard and helpless, but now I saw a way forward. Emma's treachery had been calculating, but she misjudged me. She believed I would fold, allowing her to take everything. She was mistaken. I wasn't only battling for my possessions or honor, I was fighting for myself. Chris called the next day, and for the first time in a while, I felt like the man I was before her lies broke me. Henry also contacted me with an update, stating that they were open to negotiating. Emma, it seemed, had finally realized her position wasn't as strong as she initially believed. I nodded, thinking, good, let's ensure the terminology reflects the reality. Emma's boldness persisted throughout the negotiations, but it diminished with every encounter, giving way to a brewing grudge. She knew she was falling behind. Though she refused to admit it, I could see the remorse in her eyes. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling meeting, she finally spoke. You feel like you've won, she said bitterly, but you'll never understand why I had to do this. I gazed at her with an inscrutable expression. Perhaps I won't, Emma, I replied. But that doesn't justify anything. Her eyes flared with anger, but she didn't respond. The conversation ended there, and for the first time, I felt a sense of finality. Emma's words no longer wounded me. By the time the settlement was agreed upon, I felt like a new man. The conditions were reasonable, though I had to give up some possessions. I retained most of my labor. It had been difficult to construct, but I left with my honor intact. Emma's plans had crumbled, and despite the brutality of the battle, I had come out stronger. The marriage was over, but my life was only beginning. A peculiar sense of peace followed the settlement's finality. The process had been exhausting, but I was glad it was over. Emma had signed the documents. Her intentions to leave with the majority of our assets had failed. What she walked away with was far less than what she had planned to take. As I exited the courts that day, I felt lighter. Divorce had destroyed not only a marriage, but also the illusions I had held about Emma and our life together. Chris and I later shared a quiet drink, and that night we raised a toast to the end of a conflict I hadn't asked for, but had battled valiantly through. You handled this well, Chris said, clinking his glass against mine. I hope you're proud of that. I am, I replied. For the first time, I truly meant it. I had lost enough in this process, but I hadn't lost my dignity.